Not all real estate agents are the same. Not all lawyers are the same.
Usually families think that it's half the work if I name two, but it's usually double the work if you name two.
There's a really big benefit to having an agent that has, some understanding, some knowledge, some context around probate.
The last gift you can give your family is having a good estate plan or having proper deeds draft, going with the right real estate agent to make sure that there's that clear chain of title, clear process for when you pass.
Welcome to the Texas Probate Real Estate Podcast. My name is Jeremy Kritt, owner and broker of Kritt Real Estate and the founder of Texas Probate Real Estate. Today, we are joined by none other than Keely Espindola Freund, who is an attorney at law at the Heritage Law Firm doing business here in Central Texas. We have a great show here today. And as you know, if you've checked out our other episodes, on this podcast, we try to bring to you professionals in the Central Texas area that can teach us something about Texas probate real estate to help us navigate these situations. Keely, I want to really welcome you to our podcast today.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm happy to be here.
Keely, I'm so glad that you decided to accept our invitation. You really have such an interesting background. Keely, before we get into talking about probate stuff, share with us a little bit about yourself, how you got into law, how you got into probate law, and help us get to know you a little bit.
The human side of it. I'm born and raised in Texas. I did a quick stint in California for law school. So you can imagine when we moved back to Texas with a Prius and California license plate, my neighbors were kind of looking, but I promised we were here first. No, but I did love California for the short time we were there. Landed in Georgetown, which a little north, I believe you're in Austin, Texas, central location. When you get tired of Austin, Georgetown is right up there. It's a great place to be. And then stumbling into probate, I can't promise and say that when I was a little girl, all I wanted to do was be a probate and estate planning attorney. But honestly, it's one of the rare types of law where we really get to connect with people. Naturally, most people don't want to think about their demise or passing, but it's really one of the few certainties in life. And so we help people with the planning side of that. And depending on how they do it, we can kind of give their families the last gift of ease and clarity and hopefully make usually a pretty complicated emotional time a bit easier for them. And then if they do have to go through a probate, our office is there to kind of help compassionately guide them through and make the process as smooth as it can be for them. So it really just connects the human and law side, which is why I'm drawn to it. I love our clients. I love where we are, and I love who we get to work with.
That's awesome. Did you always do probate law? Did you practice any other areas that like in depth like you do now with probate?
Since passing the bar, I've only done probate and estate planning. In law school, I worked with criminal and I did personal injury law firm where I learned it really doesn't matter what type of law you do. It just matters who you're working with, and there's good and bad attorneys everywhere, but when you find that good law firm, that's when I really enjoyed my job or the area of law. So I think criminal was the most interesting to me, but for all around balance, I do like where we're stuck with the estate planning and probate side.
That's awesome. Let's go into a little bit into probate. So, you obviously you work with a lot of clients with a lot of different situations. And I think where I'd like to start off with is in your practice these days, in terms of difficulties that you see people finding themselves in it. And let me just give you a little context, Keely. So, as a real estate broker, usually I'm coming into contact with perhaps a client of yours once they've kind of gone through the process a little bit. But a lot of the people watching this podcast, listening to this podcast, they're usually at the very, very beginning stage. So maybe they've lost a loved one. It's just starting to hit them. There's real estate involved. Now they're starting to try to figure out, okay, what do I need to do? They're going online. Maybe they stumble upon this podcast. And I'm just wondering, just in terms of your personal experience, what are you finding in terms of like difficulties that people are, find themselves in this kind of stage? And what are some good solutions that you could recommend to them?
Yeah. Well, two parts to that. I want to start with when we find ourselves in that situation. If anyone happens to be listening and they're just trying to preemptively learn about this process, the best thing to do is get the affairs in order ahead of time, because well-drafted will can save your family months and thousands of dollars. So having someone define this ahead of time to make that plan, to appoint someone either through a trust or as an executor to be the person to handle, say, real estate, that's the first step. To have already, unfortunately, a loved one's passed, they're just dealt the cards at hand. Well, first things first is to kind of gather up the information that you have. So, as loved ones, hopefully your loved one has shared where they plan to keep their documents. And so the family isn't having to search through the house to find the will or documents of the sort. But once they find the document, I mean, first thing is probably just for the ease of mind to talk to a probate attorney to kind of know the steps that they're looking with. Depending on if there's a will, if there's not a will, the way the will is drafted or trust, the process can look a lot different for different families. So I think a lot of people take it to Google, they start hearing all these horror stories, and a lot of it might not even apply to them. So just for the ease of mind to kind of have their situation be addressed so that they're not worried about things that they really don't need to be worried about, I think would save a lot of families some extra stress. That being said, though, if I can continue, there's in probate, sometimes, which I know we'll get to, there's a reason to rush the process. Other times, you can put this off a little bit if needed. If it's too emotional for you to talk about it, or if it's too fresh. Some people, they pass away. We've had calls at the office where someone passes away and a few hours later the family calls us. You can, obviously, we're there as support, but it's really a time to be grieving with your families. And then the attorney's office, we're there when you need it, but it doesn't need to be something always that people jump right into while they're amidst everything else.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, why do you think they rush so quickly to that's kind of interesting, someone passes away and then instantly they call the attorney. What do you think is going on? That maybe it's just panic or they're just, they feel they need to do something or
Yes, and they're worried that they're gonna do the wrong thing. So again, it's like that peace of mind. So for some family, yeah, give us a call and we can help put that mind at ease. Unless there's a sale going on or, you're right in the middle of something big, though, most families, like, you have a minute. So go be with your loved ones, mourn the loss of your person and kind of gather up what you need to do first before just jumping into making new problems for yourself, I'd say.
Something came to mind as you were talking, and it's actually something I haven't talked about on my program, and that is choosing an attorney. So this is kind of interesting. A lot of the conversations I have with my clients with regard to the attorneys is there's some good and then there's some bad, just like everything, same I'm sure is true of agents. I know it's true of agents. But, I think a lot of the problems I've seen between personal representatives and their attorneys is they've kind of matched with the wrong attorney. And I think it's two things. I'll just kind of give you my thought on this, and I'm curious as an attorney what you think about this. One aspect of it is I think sometimes it's just the people are not compatible, right? There's a working relationship between the attorney and the client. And sometimes, there's personality involved. There's human aspects that are involved with that. And I think sometimes we get along with certain people and we don't get along with other kinds of people, or certain kinds of people kind of come off to us in a certain way, even though they may not mean to be that way. And other people may not interpret it that way,
Yeah.
right? So I think some of it is kind of like that. But then also some of it is I have had some situations where there has been some forms of incompetence. For example, I had a situation where a client of mine had filed, for probate. The filings were done incorrectly.
Mm.
Basically, it was kind of a case mill. They have a lot of cases going on, and it's just kind of one of many cases, and it just kind of slipped through the cracks. And the house was going into foreclosure, so it went really a
Mm.
long way through time-wise until they realized there was a problem. They had to refile, and it really cost my client literally tens of thousands of dollars because the attorney made a mistake. So I think choosing that attorney is a very important thing for a lot of people going through this process. I'm actually thinking of 2 or 3 other situations that I've had as an agent where the only reason why I'm aware of is because it affected my work, right? It
Yeah.
affected the sale of the house. And as I'm sure you know, and is very appropriate for the Texas Probate Real Estate Podcast, quite frequently, of course, high net worth individuals, the house may not be the most valuable asset, but for the vast majority of people, the house, the real estate is the largest asset. It is the thing that
Oh,
needs to be
yeah.
liquidated so that heirs can get their share of the estate. So anyway, choosing that attorney is really important. there may be a prospective client here for you watching this. I mean, what are the things that people should be looking at? I mean, yeah, there's fees and all of that. I think that's only part of it. Walk me through, just from an attorney perspective, what are some things that my wife died, my son died, my neighbor, my whoever it is that I'm doing this for. Okay, now I've got to handle this.
Mhm.
How do I choose the attorney? What should I be looking for? What should I be thinking about? What's important? What's important? I'll give you, and if I could just, before I hand this over to you, I kind of think about it from like a real estate agent's perspective, right? So the worst way to choose a real estate agent is to say, well, I'm just going to find the cheapest one. That's the worst. That's like probably the worst approach you could take, right? Because
Mhm.
they're not, all attorneys are not the same. All doctors are not the same. All real estate agents are the same. Not even everyone who mows the grass, even they're not the same. So it's, there's different kinds of quality of work and knowledge and competence and skill. Anyway, tell me what you think about that.
Yeah. I think the common thing we see is people choose the attorney that drafted the will. I think for families, sometimes they just go, they know, they see that name, they see their family worked with them, and therefore they think they should work with that attorney. That's
Mhm.
not always the case, but that is sometimes where people start. My advice would be go online, read the reviews about the attorneys first, have a consultation with them to go sit down with the attorney, even if there's a charge. It's worth it. You're going to be working with this person for, the upcoming weeks or possibly months. So make sure that you like them. And as you're saying, your personalities get along with one another. This isn't something to ask your friend who happens to be a criminal attorney to just get you through the probate process of it. And so I think as you're talking about like prices or ease, sometimes they just look at the lowest maybe hourly rate. But if, like you're saying with your friend's situation, where if it goes on for months and months and months, that hourly rate's really going to add up. So you want to make sure that the attorney knows what they're doing, that this should be their main practice, I think. I don't think it should just be something on the side that they do occasionally, because you want to be with someone who knows the steps, knows the court process. Someone of that area too is a really good idea. So that's familiar with even Travis County, Williamson, and Bell County. They all handle it slightly different. So it's good to have someone who's familiar with that court process, knows the staff, that knows, because that's how you can get things done with more quick and ease, is to already know how the process works with it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm thinking of a client who had a really big problem with their property. And by the way, I keep mentioning foreclosure because in probate, this is very common. Like someone passes away, maybe the mortgage was being paid in like with auto pay. The resources are depleting, and so maybe now it becomes delinquent. It's actually, I would say, maybe 20 or 30% of my clients end up having there's some sort of delinquency with that mortgage,
Mm.
which makes time of the essence with these things. But what I'm thinking about is I had a client who really tried to go very, very cheap with the legal part, the legal aspect. And they chose a service, which, by the way, I'm not going to say the name because I don't want to get sued for anything here, naming companies. We only try to promote people here, okay? But there was a company who, basically, I don't know exactly how it works. I think it's kind of like a lead generation system for attorneys
Mm.
where, they advertise, you call in, they connect you with an attorney, right? Something like nationwide. But it was this weird arrangement where it was very cheap. But one of the reasons why it was cheap was that you could not, and I'm not totally sure on the real like detail, like nitty gritty specifics, but it was almost like you could only like communicate like through email or like through their system. They had like a platform where like that's how
Okay.
you communicate with them. And then he had a very complicated situation. So he's thinking, oh, is I got the will, it's going to be no big deal. But he actually had several things that were a little bit complicated and needed more working through with the attorney,
Mhm.
and it really, dragged it on, and then also when he had problems, he couldn't get his questions answered in a timely manner, and eventually the attor they just the attorney and my client, just decided to kinda, like, bypass their system, which I guess was against their, whatever the service terms of service was, and started working together. But my point is that it's like his approach to choosing his legal counsel, his help, his legal help for this matter was it was based on this one dimension, price, which it's understandable, right? I mean,
Mhm.
price is important because, maybe you don't have, a lot of resources to work with. So you're thinking about that. But in this case, trying to go very cheap with legal actually cost him
Cost
a lot of money, way more money. I mean,
yeah.
way, way more money. So this choosing of the attorney is very interesting. One other thing, Keely, is I've had a few instances where things like this have happened, and then because I do this program, I know a lot of attorneys in this space, especially in Central Texas, especially, and they're working with the attorney. It's like it's really dragging on. The attorney is not giving them the time of day. They have their own life, right? They have their own life that they're dealing with, and so they're trying to like push this along so they can move on with their own stuff. And, I've referred them to other attorneys. I think probably you might be one of those attorneys in the future, hopefully. I'm surprised sometimes by what I hear, but then again, I hear a lot of good stories too, great attorneys. All the attorneys I've had on here
Mhm.
are excellent attorneys. I've referred people to attorneys that have come on this program, and those are great attorneys. They're really good. They're very responsive. They're competent. But I think it's really important. I think there's not enough talked about in terms of like making that selection. So going back, let's talk a little bit about some of the things you mentioned. So one of the things is money. So attorneys, we have kind of like an hourly model or a fee-based model. Can you share with me a little bit? And this might be helpful for people because most people don't understand the legal business, right? So there's the practicing of law, but then there's the legal of business because Keely, of course, has to keep the lights on. She has to make money. The firm has to make money. So, there's a business model there. And what I've noticed is, there's basically for the attorneys, there's kind of these two models. There's this basically kind of flat fee model versus an hourly model. What are some considerations, if money is a factor, what are some considerations when maybe a consumer is looking at these two different models? What's going on for the attorney and the firm, and what are the things that the potential client should think about?
Yeah. The heritage law where I'm at right now, we work mostly on flat fee basis, but I have worked at firms in the past where we do the hourly rate. So with experience from both of them, I'll start with the hourly rate one. Attorneys will sometimes plan to do that because we don't know how big the case is going to be. So especially with families who are fighting and this process can get drawn out, we can't really do a flat fee with that because we don't know what the workload's going to look like. If we have to keep going back to court or amending filings because the family can't get along, that's going to naturally make the process longer and more work for us. If it's more cut and dry and it's clear that this is the executor, the family's getting along, we're just trying to get through the process with ease, and like our office can quote you a flat fee for that, where we say we think the process is going to be around here. And after doing this many, many times, it usually is right around there because we know what the court costs are. We know how much it costs to post in the newspaper. We know usually how much time about it's going to take us. So then families aren't surprised at the end to get a really big bill like your friend where it's been drawn out for so long. Our clients know ahead of time what this is going to cost me. And then on my end of it, so we have the retainer ahead of time, the flat fee, but I am not paying myself that fee until we are complete. So there's like little processes of it of once the application's filed, I can take a part. Once we go to court, I can take a part, but then I don't get the rest of your retainer until this is complete. And so for me, I also have that carrot at the end of I want to get this done for you. I want to get this done for me so we can both move on. And so I personally much prefer the flat fee model. There's no surprises. There's no, gawking at the bill at the end of the day. And usually all of our clients are usually much happier about that. With the probate, especially too, you were talking about your friend who, had more complicated
My
things.
client.
Your client who had more complicated matters where they had to keep reaching out to the attorney. When I worked on the hourly rate, sometimes that was hard for me because more often than not, the husband passes first, and then most of our clients are a little older. They might have more questions. And it was just a little hard for me to bill an hourly rate to a sweet lady who's just calling and has a simple question. So with our flat fee, it's just anything regarding this probate, I'm going to be there for you. And I'm not going to be nitpicking every email or phone call that comes in. So that's another reason why, especially for this type of law, again, if it's straightforward and I know the process through, I'd prefer us both to be aware of what the cost is and so that I can be available for you and you know what your retainer is going to pay for this.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned billing for every little thing, and that's another thing I've noticed is that with hourly rate scenarios, a lot of times I've had clients that they're afraid to call the attorney because
Mhm.
it's so.
And that's horrible. That's not how it should be.
And they asked me, and I'm like, "I'm not an attorney. I
Mhm.
can't answer this question for you, right?" It's like,
Mhm.
it's they because they're like, "Well, Jeremy, you do a lot of probate real estate, surely but I'm like, "Well, that's interpreting the law. That I can't do that, you know?
Mhm.
I can say, 'Hey, here, read this,' and you can interpret it yourself, but I can't interpret the law for you."
Yes.
And so it is kind of interesting because it does create this kind of anxiety around communication
Mhm.
with the lawyer. So that's quite interesting.
We want less anxiety. We wanna be a resource and feel like they can call and ask us. Because then also too, if they're worried to ask us about something and they go take matters into their own hands but do something incorrectly, we might have to spend more time fixing that, or that could lead to more problems later on. So we wanna be we wanna help you through this, not we don't wanna be another obstacle for you.
I think it's really important to for the consumer to understand this aspect of the legal business, because we don't normally think about it, but it's helpful for someone to understand, okay, this is how attorneys think about it. This is why they do what they do. This is why they structure their fee structure the way they do. Here are these two ways you can do it, and these are kind of the implications of both of these. But I'm assuming like for if you're going into like a contested situation or there's a lot of, there's going to be maybe some litigation involved or something like that, then you're probably not going to have a lot of flat fee options for that. And then
Mhm.
then you're probably looking at how competent and how experienced and knowledgeable they are versus how much they charge. And you're trying to weigh those together. But in your case, you're mainly staying out. You're not. Are you involved in litigation at all? Any kind of things like that, or are you just purely just kind of a normal kind of I don't want to say easy. That's not the right way to put it, but how
The
do you
more
say?
straight mhm.
Sorry, go ahead.
The uncontested probates.
Uncontested probate.
Yes, we handle uncontested probate. So that's the families getting along and we're just trying to get this through this. If we have families fighting about the will or contesting it, that's when the litigation and the hourly rates really kick in.
So how does that work? So they come in your office and you're asking some questions, right? You know the questions to ask. You're asking
Mhm.
the questions, and at what point do you start how are you thinking about it as they're in your office? Like what are some of the questions you're asking? What are some of the things you're looking for?
I'm looking if they tell me that their brother has also hired a lawyer, that's a red flag right there. I tell them because of the flat fee, I tell them, this is what this includes, and I need to know ahead of time. Depending on the situation, we might have to have all the heirs sign off an agreement for something. And so I ask them, I said, do you have contact with these people? Do you think they would be willing to sign this? And I let them know, if this ever became contested, we can no longer represent you. And so I want to save them the issue of now having to hire two lawyers. So people who, and they understand that. Like I had a family who the decedent's family was not in agreement with them. And she said, this might get dicey. And I just said, I don't want you to spend money on me and then have to just hire another attorney if things get messy. I'd rather you just be set up with someone who can defend you if things do get messy. But for
Yeah.
most of the families that come in with us, yeah, it's mom, dad, two kids, and they're just trying to get the house transferred, sell a house, access some accounts that we forgot about. And I tell them, if we all get along with this, the process is going to be quicker and easier for you and less money, less illegal fees. And that can also inspire people to get along to just get it wrapped up.
Yeah. Moving beyond fees, you mentioned something interesting, and that is you said, believe that it should be an attorney that really is specialized or is kind of in that probate niche.
Mhm.
And it's kind of interesting because when you're and I'm just trying to frame this in a way that kind of just really normal people, they're driving down the street, they're thinking about, they have a legal problem. And, even here in Austin, you're driving down the street and you'll see like a sign, like it has like every law, like it's like a lawyer and they've got immigration law,
Mhm.
probate, wills, injury, it's like everything. And it's interesting. Tell me a little bit about you mentioned, it should be someone that is, and I agree with you, it's someone who should be doing this every day. But tell me a little bit, give us some insight. Okay, so we have lawyers that are just like they're doing it like it's like the menu of all all possible legal services. And then we've got heritage law here with the wonderful Keely, who's, she's doing probate, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. What's going on there? What are the problems that you see with potentially? Obviously, I mean, I know law is very collegial, and we don't want to,
Mhm.
put down any other lawyers, but like, what's going on with those lawyers versus like someone like you that what you like? Why do we have some that are just really like specialized or kind of have a lane, they're going with it, versus we have this kind of like I'm doing everything.
Yeah. Well, I'll start by on the advocate side of it. Like I know of a firm in Georgetown that has a slew of different areas of practice. However, within their law firm, they have certain attorneys that
Hmm.
specialize. So it's not like everyone does everything. It's just
Hmm.
this person does that, and that's how they're able to name. So I'm not saying like all firms that have it advertised like that is something you should steer clear of because they might have some people who really do specialize in that area. But what we run into is, yeah, if you have a criminal attorney who's like, "No, I can handle this for you. Like, don't worry." The processes are just there it's different. And so to think that because this is a simple case, it will be simple for this attorney who doesn't do this normally. There's ways that we can make this a much quicker process versus a lot longer. And so like an example is if an attorney comes in and they forgot to file one thing or they didn't send all the paperwork they were supposed to send for that county before the hearing. I've seen at the hearing, the judge or staff say, we cannot hear this case because just procedurally it wasn't done correctly. And I feel like that's a common issue with people trying to practice different areas of law is you just get caught up in the little things that end up
Hmm.
causing a much bigger delay. It goes both ways. We sometimes have clients who come in and thankfully they're really happy with our services and then they want us to do something else for them. And I say, we don't do that kind of law. And they said, well, can you do just this one? And I say, would you want your dentist to do a brain surgery on you. Like it's kind of like that. You want someone who this is their practice and field so that you feel trusted that they know what they're doing with this.
I it's interesting because I do think that the general public thinks that, look, if they're a lawyer, they just must know all the laws, right? They just
Mhm.
must know the whole thing, right? But it's quite the stack of laws in Texas is quite quite big, right? It's just hard to know it all, right? I
Mhm.
I I I think of even just in real estate law, I mean, we've got attorneys, all they do are water rights, oil and gas. Like it's just like they're just in this very small kind of vein of law. And yeah, if I had a problem on my ranch with water, yeah, I'm going to the water rights guy, right? I'm not going to the just general, real estate guys. So,
Yes.
yeah. Let's move on a little bit now. I want to talk a little bit about the process, and I'm kind of curious to know. Just you're obviously a very experienced probate attorney. You're the kind of probate attorney I would want to hire, and I'm just wondering, as people are going through the process, what are some mistakes that you see people making? They've already the decedent, they're passed away. They have the will, or maybe there's no will. They're in process with you. They've retained you for your services. Now they're your client. They're in process. What are some things that you've noticed, that mistakes that people have made, things that you wish that other people would know about, as they're entering this process?
Mm. One is to get organized with the decedent's affairs if you can. So there's always, depends. You talked about foreclosure. Sometimes there's instances where you just have to jump in and get this ball going. But mostly if you have the ability to wait, get organized first to try to see how much of the decedent's assets you can have access to ahead of time. See what is holding you up, meaning if there's a bank account that has a beneficiary listed, usually through the process, you can just get that account transferred and it never touches probate or goes to court at all. So I advise families to try to do that first. Try to see how much can you do without involving the court. Because also there's some tools in Texas, we have something called immuniment of title, which is a more simplified version of probate. It's quicker, it's usually cheaper, and it applies but only to a limited situation. It does not appoint an executor. So that's why it's important to have a real understanding of what you need to have access to ahead of time. Because if a family does that easier muniment of title to maybe like just move the house, but then they end up finding that there's a bank account later, well, now we don't have an executor to get that account. So really getting organized with what do we have and what do we really need to go to probate for first is probably the main thing I would advise families for.
Okay. And what about dealing with other heirs. And a lot of times what I find, just to give you a little insight in kind of my business here at Kritt Real Estate, Texas Probate Real Estate, one of the things I find interesting is when I have a prospective client come to me and we're talking and I want to know about the property. I want to know, but I also want to know about the estate insofar as like who's involved here. Am I going to get a call from,
Yeah.
drunk Uncle Joe, which has happened? Drunk Uncle Joe has called me. Okay. Is there craziness here? Now, I don't mind crazy real estate. By the way, I don't know if you know this, Keely, real estate is crazy. And so, I always know there's going to be something because we're dealing with people, right? We're dealing with
Mhm.
people. We're dealing with all the, messiness of human life, with a real estate transaction. And usually they're under pressure when they're doing it because selling a house, even buying a house, but selling a house in the case of probate real estate, it's very stressful. They're dealing with all the legal things. They're dealing a lot of times with loss. Not always. Sometimes the executor is very distant from the situation, but usually they are pretty close.
Yeah, we've all heard.
And yeah, and then they have also the selling of the house. Sometimes they never even sold a house before, right? There's all kinds of things going on. But I always ask about how many heirs are there? Are you guys getting along?
Mm.
Because I wanna know because a lot of times I find even if there's an executor, an appointed person, they're operating in consensus with the other people involved, the people who are gonna benefit from the sale. And sometimes maybe it's not a contested probate, but there is some disagreement on, like, what should happen, how it should happen. I always try to get those people together on, when I do a listing appointment with that kind of, that situation once I've kind of figured out that okay there's two other brothers or sisters involved and they're
Mhm.
talking to them a lot and they're it's like okay I want them on the call, I want them with us at this appointment, right? So I always want to know what's going on, but conflict is very, very common in these situations. Tell me a little bit about relationship management in these situations. Just what have you seen? What are some mistakes do you think that people make with this? What can you say? What kind of advice can you give to people?
My favorite is when we're doing estate planning and they want to name co-agents or executors. And I say, do they get along well? And they say, they're going to have to get along well. If your kids or family don't get along while you're alive, you passing and having money involved and a house sale involved is not going to help their relationship. Unfortunately, it just usually doesn't. It adds more stress. And if they're already not getting along, having to agree on like which real estate agent to use and how much to sell the house is not going to be great for their relationship. So a common tool people use, I'm sure you see a lot, is like the transfer on death deeds or ladybird deeds, where sometimes they'll name, if mom and dad have two kids, they'll name their kids as the alternate beneficiaries to get the house. But if the kids don't get along, I'm sure, see the problem of all those little tiny decisions that have to be made as now two co-owners that don't get along well. So on the estate side planning of things, I always ask them, like, do they get, before we ever name alternate owners of a home, I say, do they get along? Could they agree with this? And if they give me any type of hesitation, I say, listen, I want to avoid probate for you, but I don't know if this is a good idea. Sometimes it's best to have one person like the executor or the trustee to make all those decisions, one person to be talking to the real estate agent and have that authority versus a whole slew of heirs that all have their own interests and concerns.
I couldn't agree more. I will say that I really do not think the co-executor scenario is a good I don't think that is a good option. If I just from my vantage point, selling properties, I find that it really adds way more complexity than there has to be. It is and you know what's funny is that they actually in real estate, as far as a real estate sale goes, they usually will like they'll defer to one, right? So eventually they realize it's like, okay, we have to organize a Zoom call or a phone call every time we have to, make a critical decision. And then it's kind of annoying, right? It's kind of like it's
Yeah.
like, it's like, hey, it's like, okay, just call John. John will be the point
But
man. So
that
why not
puts
just
you
have
in a
one?
hard situation because you need to be talking to both of, like, you have a
Right,
duty to talk
right,
to both of them. So it
right.
puts, and that's what I tell them, same with, like, power of attorneys or that sort of thing. It's just you're making now third parties in a really hard decision, and if one brother's not picking up the phone and you have to talk to them about a deal, like, yeah, I'm with you. Try to just have one. If
Yeah,
you can
yeah.
diversify, maybe have one person as a power of attorney, one person as the executor, but making them work together as co's is usually never the answer.
So you discourage it.
Yes, most of the time, yes.
Okay. And so but the motivation of from the estate planning side, the motivation is what are they thinking? Is it kind of an idealistic thought like, "Oh, okay, when I die, this is gonna bring them together?"
Sometimes, yes, they're gonna have to work together to get the money. Other times is they just don't wanna pick a favorite. They don't wanna hurt the feelings of the other child to say, "I picked this person," and then some people, "Well, they picked him as the executor." Yeah, well, they're not gonna get everything. It's just the person who's gonna talk to the real estate agent. It's they think they're doing them a favor by including them both in the process, and more often than not, that's why, is because they don't wanna pick a favorite. And so they'll
Yeah.
pick 2 and have them deal it out later. I had some brothers in yesterday who they were named as co-agents, and when I told them that our flat fee was gonna be more if they're both serving, they decided, "Okay, yeah, let's have this one do it." The other one declined to serve, so that way we're only dealing with 1. Because on my side of it, if you're both serving, I now have to draft 2 of a lot of these, or you both have to come to court. It's usually families think that it's half the work if I name 2, but it's usually double the work if you name 2.
That's very interesting. See, this is the kind of conversation I think is very helpful. I always say, it's like a lot of things in life, we don't really learn about it until we're in the situation. So like
Mhm.
take the situation, like when people find themselves in the situation, like they've never done it before. They don't know what the laws are. They haven't thought through all of these things. So I think this conversation is going to be very helpful
Oh,
to
I
whoever's
hope.
listening. Well, it's interesting. This is actually one of the reasons why I do the podcast is because there's not a lot of information out there, and also it's not just like a talking head, like just like okay, blah blah blah. I go on ChatGPT and create a little script or something, but to really hear it from, for example, in this case, with an attorney like yourself, how do you think about it too? Because it's one thing to know kind of like if this is what happens, but also how does the attorney think about it? Because that does provide some insight. For example, what you just
Mhm.
said, I'd never really thought about that. It's like, okay, yeah, it's okay. You got two co-appointed people, but yeah, now I got to do 2 of these documents too. Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's so you're multiplying, right? So most people probably, even I didn't even really think about that, but that is a
Mhm.
factor. That makes a lot of sense. What are some other things when you're in process with client? Are there any other like pitfalls or mistakes that you see maybe on a somewhat routine basis that it's like, man, if I could really tell these people out there that are listening, to think of something, consider something, do something. Is there any other thing you could think of?
2 quick ones. 1, your power of attorney does nothing after you pass. So people think they don't need a will because they have a power of attorney, and then therefore that person could, like, sell the house. Power of attorneys, they're done once you pass away. There's no longer that principle where the agent can act for, so therefore it's done. That's number 1. Number 2, there's a common misconception that because husband and wife are both on the title of the house, it will automatically pass to the survivor. And unless there's language specifying that, that is not the case in Texas. And this is a huge pitfall for mixed families because if we have it set up like that, where it's husband and wife and they have children from a previous marriage, you could find yourself in a situation where you now co own the property with your decedent's children. And that, I mean, I'm sure you see that too sometimes, where now that's not what people were intending. They thought because both names are on the deed that it automatically passed over, but that's not the case in Texas. And that's something, I mean, when I bought a house, I didn't know that. And that's something as a estate planning attorney is like, we can help you with that or help with the deeds. But that's a big one because if it's husband and wife and they have all the bank accounts set up correctly where it's payable on death, the right of survivorship, people think they don't have to go through a probate, but then they go try to sell the house and decedent's name is still on it.
I am guilty as charged. When I was a baby real estate agent with my Texas real estate license was dripping because it was so new, it was so freshly printed off the press. I had a situation like that because you just don't know, right? You're a beginning agent,
Uh-huh.
you know, grandma's calling you over to sell the house and you realize, oh, wait a minute, the title company calls you, go, hey, wait a minute, we got a problem here now. But the problem is we have a buyer now in contract, right? And that's the problem. By the way, that actually brings up an important two things. The first is that this is why in selecting a real estate agent or a real estate broker, to sell a house in this situation, it's important that you choose someone that has some experience because I can tell you for a fact, I don't know if you know this, Keely, but around 75% of agents did not sell a house last year in the United States. Okay. The average agent is only selling 2 or 3 houses. So just having a real estate license in itself, yes, it gives you the permission, the legal ability to do brokerage services for money, but and represent other people in a real estate transaction. But I can tell you right now, like, someone who just got their real estate license, they're not going to know all these things that we're talking about. And this is just one. This is just really one aspect of it. There are other things that come up with probate specifically. Just, one thing comes to mind. So, for example, I had a situation once where this was actually kind of very unusual situation. This happened in Austin and Travis County. Basically, my client gave me the letters of testamentary. It said independent executor. Now, I have a little bit of a checklist that I go through to just
Mhm.
as I'm doing my due diligence to prepare everything for the sale. I always look up the case on the portal, the legal portal, just to see kind of what's going on there. I just like to just look at it, and I noticed something. It said he was an administrator. It didn't say it wasn't independent executor. It was a completely different thing. Well, the reason why it was relevant was there was a deed of trust. There was a mortgage on the property, and there was a certain thing. Yeah, I don't want to go into it, but yeah, there's a certain thing that has to happen with that before you could sell it, and it had not happened. And so we were marketing the property, and I just pointed it out, and, I'm not playing, attorney here. I just said, "Hey, look," I go, "Hey, this document doesn't match with what I'm seeing here. You should talk to your attorney." Well, the clerk they made a mistake. They printed out the wrong certificate. I don't know how they did it. Something wires got crossed or something. Just a little bit of knowledge can help you find and that's a very unusual situation, but just a
Mhm.
little bit of knowledge can go a long way in these situations because, for example, in this situation, I mean, we could have gone under contract with a buyer. The seller can't perform. Maybe they stick around for that transaction, but also it messes up a lot of things. For example, we don't want to put a house on the market and then pull it from the market to put it back on the market because
Oh,
that,
yeah.
that hurts the listing, right?
Mhm.
Also, we don't want to have an angry buyer saying, well, I thought you said there was no problem with this property. Yeah, you said it was
Mhm.
appropriate, but there's no problem. And now you're saying it's this, that. So there's all kinds of problems that can happen. So my point is that Keely is that I think there's a great benefit, just like there's a great benefit to choosing someone like yourself, someone who is very dedicated to probate law and has seen a lot of cases, a lot of situations, understands the court procedures for the probate court, understands what they really need to look for with when talking with their clients. I think the same thing is in real estate. Not all real estate agents are the same, not all lawyers are the same. So there's a really big benefit to having an agent that has, some understanding, some knowledge, some context around probate. I'm thinking of another thing is I shared with you earlier that, it's not uncommon for these properties to have some amount of distress. The person passed away. A lot of times the mortgage is on auto pay, the bank account's depleting. Eventually it goes to zero. Now they're behind, they're getting notices. A lot of people don't know, hey, in a lot of these cases, there's, a period of time where, they can't foreclose, right? There's some protection there. And it's good to just have knowledge of these little things that intersect where it intersects, the legal aspect intersects with what we do in real estate. So
Yeah.
having some specialization, some niche focus is a benefit, I think, to people going through probate. Let me ask you this. What are some things that you see happening in the probate space in your world, in the legal world? Is there any things with the law that are changing? Is there any trends that you're seeing with clients or in general? Is there what's the state of the art or of the practice, as you see it?
I sound like everyone's saying it, but technology and AI, I mean, that's a huge
Okay.
change, and people are kinda taking matters into their own hands more now that they have that, but unfortunately, AI isn't perfect. There was actually, believe it was last year or the year before, there was a new rule where if attorneys use AI with Williamson County, we have to specifically say we used AI in here because there are so many errors that are involved with it, and it's not the Texas probate code. It's AI. It's taking from a bunch of different sources to put something out. And so we also see some clients that come in and they're like, "Oh, I'll just do my will on ChatGPT," or that sort of thing. And there's some more, I won't name names, but online resources where people do their own estate planning or do their own deeds sometimes. And like you were just saying, even the smallest thing can make a big difference with it. And what we see a lot with, especially doing your own wills, is unfortunately they're often not executed correctly, which could leave people without having a will. And the executor, or excuse me, the decedent, the person who's making the will, doesn't know this until they've passed that their will wasn't valid. And then it leaves the family with the issue. So like we said before, it's just one of those things that's not great to skimp out on. This is the last gift you can give your family, is having a good estate plan or having proper deeds draft, going with the right real estate agent to make sure that there's that clear chain of title, clear process for when you pass.
Absolutely. It's so funny. Our second guest that has mentioned AI. It is becoming a common theme, and it's funny. I see it also in my work. I had a listing appointment last year. It was a referral. And with referrals, there's much higher trust going into the situation. Usually, you have a little bit less questions going into a referral situation. But I was there at my listing appointment. I had done what I do normally. And we got to the listing agreement phase. I have all these disclosures I got to give them. I got this listing agreement I got to give them, and I go through it. I go through it. I mean, not every single word, but just hey, this is what this is. We're going through it, and he was scanning every page in front of me in ChatGPT, waiting for the output, then asking me questions based on that,
Oh
and it was
no.
fun. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was very long. Yeah, and it was like and by the way, the whole transaction was like that. Every email, and now, I've been doing real estate for almost a decade now. So I have sold hundreds of houses. I have, this is definitely, I'm way beyond my first rodeo on this. Okay. And so I'm not afraid of questions. It's very unlikely that a consumer would ask me a question I can't answer. If they do, I definitely can find the answer. But most of the questions they're going to have, I'm probably going to know it. But he was asking me questions, and it was interesting because I use AI a lot for a lot of different things. I'm like everyone else out here. I'm using it for a lot of different things. But he was asking me questions, and I was like, "Yeah, that's a good question, but it doesn't apply to you. That has nothing to do with what we're doing here, right?" So it's like it's pulling things into like it's reading into certain things that it should not read into. It's making a big deal out of certain things that are not a big deal. And in some cases, it's like, well, you're worried about this over here, but actually, this thing over here is actually much more important. That's what I'm worried about. And so it's like this lack of context, but people feel very confident, right? Because the AI is giving them, it's giving them this kind of data dump and kind of analysis, and it sounds very confident. But to someone like if it's legal, I'm sure you're hearing and you're like, well, that's not quite. Keely, I have really enjoyed this time with you. You've really shared a lot of helpful information that I think is going to be so valuable to our audience. I want to really thank you for coming on today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed getting to speak with you this morning.
Keely, I really want to make sure that people who have been watching or listening to today's episode, I want to make sure that they can find you if they need help, if they need a good attorney like yourself. How can they find you?
We would be happy to help. Heritage Law has a office mainly in Georgetown. We also have an office in Harker Heights. So we serve Travis, Williamson, and Bell County. Best case to connect us is probably just give our office a call. You can talk to our sweet staff, kind of tell us what's going on, and we can walk you through to see if we will hopefully be able to help you. Moving forward, if we ever schedule an intake appointment, we send out the kind of intake so you know what questions we might be asking to let you know ahead of time. Our website, you can always email, call us, be happy to help. We're
Awesome.
at Heritage Law.
And just, is there any kind of parting advice you can give us, Keely? Can you give us some wisdom, a word just as we go? What's something that you can tell us, put out there that would be something you really want someone to know about if they're listening to this?
I'll end with what I started with, that estate planning is one of the last gifts that you can give your family. And although I know it's not fun to think about, it is the most natural, sure thing that's going to happen to all of us, and it's going to affect all of our loved ones. So really doing proper estate planning can be the last gift that you give one. And the more planning that you do, and the more planning to make sure that your house and your assets are set up correctly, the easier it's going to be for the people we leave behind.
That's really good advice. And Keely, I just want you to know that you have my highest endorsement. And so if you're looking for an attorney for your probate situation, you should absolutely get in touch with Keely at Heritage Law. I think that's a wrap for this episode. Again, my name is Jeremy Kritt, broker and owner of Kritt Real Estate and the founder of Texas Probate Real Estate. If you are in probate and you have a house that you need to sell, I have an advanced strategy that will actually sell that property and sell it for way more money than you could get any other way. Look forward to seeing you on the next one.